I have this saying that I introduced at some point. It has something to do with a lot of acting teachers and directors talking about choices. And at some point I said, there are no choices really, there are only inevitabilities. Because if you're following your truth, of course, you have one truth at a time, right? You have what you have. Truth is what you actually experience right now. Therefore, it isn't inevitability.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unlocking Creativity, Conversations in the Demidov School. My name is Kimon Fioretos, and I'm a certified teacher in the Demidov School of Acting, joined as always by Andrei Malayev-Babel, the head and certifying master teacher of the Demidov School. Nolan, unfortunately, could not join us today, but we are lucky because this week we are happily joined again by wonderful Diana Wright. And Diana found this work in 2016 at FSU Oslo Conservatory as a student, and then she taught alongside Andrei for 2 years, and now she's a member of the Demidov Association, and she's following the Actor Certificate course. And thank you all for being here today. And Andrei and Diana, today's subject is another one of our Demidovian cultures, the culture of surrender, or else greenlighting. Nolan has sent a question, and should I start us off with Nolan's question?
That would be so neat because, of course, we miss Nolan dearly.
Yeah.
And we would love to hear his question. This way he will be present here with us. Perfect.
Perfect. So Nolan's question is, he says actually, our culture is so often dedicated to individual success, strength, and in many, many ways being a victor booking the contract. Getting the award, being followed by enough people on Instagram, the word surrender seems so foreign in the context of that way of thinking. Why did Demidov choose this word, and what does it mean in the context of our work?
What an interesting point of view, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Nolan is looking at surrender as something that is selfless, so to speak, right? And not egotistical, not centered on self. Well, it's a very interesting angle, isn't it, Diana? The kind of selflessness of this work that Demidov is creating, right? Because you truly are yielding to powers that are outside of you very often, right? You are channeling powers, you are channeling energies, where you're just basically a vehicle, right? A conductor for these energies. You are certainly doing a lot of taking it off of the partner, where the partner is determining what's going to happen next, because you're just responding to the partner, you're responding to the environment, you're responding to something that is happening outside of you or something that you are channeling. So surrendering, yielding, giving in, right? Green lighting. Well, green lighting what? You can say green light yourself, right? But you also very often green light something that at least you do not experience as coming from you, right? It's something that is happening to you, which is why sometimes people look at this and they say, well, is it mystical? Is it something that is actually pointing toward interference of other powers? And of course, the truth is, it is as mystical as everything that surrounds us. Science does a pretty good job explaining it, but at the very same time, even science is always going to find something that is not explained. Diana, I'm very interested in hearing your reaction to this angle that Nolan is offering, where he is looking at surrender as something that is not self-centered, as something that is very selfless in a way.
Sure. I look at surrender as a way of saying that I am accepting the present moment. It's a way to be non-judgmental and a way to be non-resistant. So if you're fully surrendered, you are walking in acceptance of what's in front of you without judgment, without resisting. And it's saying yes. It's giving yourself full permission to receive and then move through that which you have said yes to and are receiving. That is what initially comes up for me, but it's kind of just like allowing. It's kind of giving over to the inevitable almost.
Beautifully put, giving
is
over
what I
to
think
the
about when I hear.
inevitable. Yes, I have this saying that I introduced at some point. It has something to do with a lot of acting teachers and directors talking about choices. And at
Sure.
some point I said, there are no choices really, there are only inevitabilities. Because
Mm.
if you're following your truth, of course, you have one truth at a time, right? You have what you have. Truth is what you actually experience right now. Therefore, it is an inevitability. And so that is, I think, exactly what you are saying. But as I listen to you, Diana, I'm reminded how different Demidov is from most of the established approaches, if not all of the established approaches, right? Because usually, and some of you listening to us right now, you are probably wondering, wait a second, there's something that is not really connecting. Everything is supposed to be designed in my performance. Everything is supposed to be preset. Everything is supposed to be controlled. Otherwise, how can I tell the story, right? If every movement, every intonation, every effect that I need to produce upon the audience, anything that they're supposed to take out of my performance, the story, right? If it's not set, if it's not exactly designed, if it's not constructed, right? Then how can I possibly be in control? And Demidov is talking about completely different control.
Mm-hmm.
As I am listening to you, I'm reminded of it. It's a very peculiar control, but it's the only real control, in my opinion. And that is when you are controlled by something larger than you, that connects you and the playwright and the director and all of the partners, the ensemble, and that is operating through you, and you are yielding, surrendering to that something. And by surrendering to that something, you really feel in control. Because for as long as you're controlling every moment, let's be very honest, you are never going to be in control. It's impossible. Why? Because something is always going to go not according to plan
Mm-hmm.
and bump you out of control, and you will be grasping and you will be helpless. Only when you yield to something larger than you, your talent, inspiration, intuition, instinct, right? These things that Demidov demystifies, only then are you totally in control. As paradoxical as this thought might sound, I think for the conversation about surrender, it is a very, very important thing to mention. Kimon, what are your thoughts?
The image that comes to mind, and there's so many facets to the word and to the culture of surrender, but one of the images that I have is literally walking towards the edge of the circumstances and then kind of letting go and being sucked in by the life of the play, by the life of the character, and just surrender to those forces and just letting go. You've given such a wonderful image when you've spoken again and again about that little veil in the hurricane. And we usually talk about that when we talk about passivity. But for me, it's the same thing, that hurricane might be the circumstances. And I just let myself go, and it's going to take me wherever it feels like taking me.
So I surrender to the circumstances. I
Mhm.
surrender to the imaginary circumstances. That's very important because, of course, Stanislavski says, take the circumstances, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot take them, Demidov says. Like in life, they might take you by the scruff of your neck, right? They will push you and they will pull you. But how on earth can you take the circumstances? You can only place yourself under the circumstances, as
Mm-hmm.
Demidov says, right? In other schools, you convey the circumstances, right? You kind of make sure that the circumstances land with the audience. You tell the circumstances. And that too is completely counterintuitive, right? Because in life, do we ever convey the circumstances? Do we ever make sure that we make the circumstances clear? Of course not. We live. And that's what we're designed to do. We're designed to live in life, or as Demidov suggested, on stage. The Art of Living on Stage is the title of his most practical book, and in front of the camera, of course. I would like to talk about some other very important aspect of the culture of surrender, the culture of greenlighting. And to me, it is solving a lot of problems that are completely unresolved. Everybody is familiar with the Stanislavskian magic if, which is, of course, a trick where you are saying, okay, it's very difficult for me to believe in these imaginary circumstances because I am me. I have my circumstances as an actor, and the character's circumstances and the character's life is, of course, completely different. And Stanislavski kind of, well, accepts that shortcoming of the actor, right? And says, very good, then don't believe in that at all. Just say, what if I was now, for example, in deep debt and my creditors were chasing me and I was risking to be put in prison for debts, right? If we're talking about 19th century. What if? And the moment you say what if, for a second, the correct emotions will appear, wouldn't they? The problem is that it will only last a second. Do you see what I mean? Or somebody else will say, well, using Stanislavskian emotional recall, right, something that he introduced at some point and then probably was very sorry that he did because people overused it. So imagine that you recall something similar from your own life, right? And for a second, again, you're right there. You have an emotion that is very similar to what you're supposed to experience as an actor. But the problem is that that too is about to fizzle. So all of these mechanisms that are supposed to jumpstart the actor's process and put them in the shoes of the character and serve them the kind of emotion that is at least similar to what they're supposed to experience as a character, it all works for about split of a second. And that is the unresolved aspect of it. And Demidov is introducing something very important. He's introducing surrender. He is the only one who is introducing the culture of surrender, the culture of greenlighting. He is teaching you how to surrender to that experience, even though it is very faint and very fleeting. He's teaching you how to greenlight that experience, although it is very subtle. And by doing it, amplify it, and by doing it, actually continue rolling upon the path of the character, no longer worrying about any jump starts, about any devices, because of course in other techniques, you have to constantly re-jump start that engine, right? Because it fizzles, you have to now jump start it again. It stalls, you have to jump start it again. Demidovian surrender and greenlighting, of course, is a beautiful device that allows you to only jump start something once and then give in to the experience and be corrupted by the imaginary circumstances, and the rest is history. That is also something very important. I discovered it in a way, and Kim and I know it will be close to what you are doing. I discovered it when, for the first time, having done Demidov for several years, that was a long time ago, of course, I revisited some of the Michael Chekhov exercises that never worked for me before fully. Neither have I really seen them work with others, where they resulted in something that Chekhov was striving toward. But when I used the greenlighting and surrender to the Chekhovian sensations, to the Chekhovian gestures, I actually produced amazing result with my students who were in that masterclass. But that is where I paused and said, wait a second, what is really at work here? Chekhov or Demidov? And of course, my answer to that was, in the end, it is Demidov, with that very powerful culture of surrender that resolves a lot of unresolved issues and answers a lot of very difficult problems.
It's funny you say that, Andre, because lately I've been always thinking that I can take principles and cultures from Demidov and I can course correct any other technique, but I don't need any other technique to correct something in Demidov.
Amen. Amen. Yeah. Because Demidov resolved these things that are left unresolved in other schools. Absolutely. Diana, can I ask you a tricky question?
Uh-oh.
I know. because I get that question a lot. Okay, Demidov has surrender and greenlighting.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why does he have both? What is the difference between surrender and greenlighting? Isn't it ultimately the same thing? If it's the same thing, then why surrender in one instance and greenlighting in another? Maybe you can talk about it from your practical standpoint, because you've been practicing Demidov as an actor, as a teacher, obviously, as a director also for quite a while. And maybe you never ran into that question. Maybe nobody asked it, or you did not think about it because you were just practicing. But maybe in
Sure.
this case, you can improvise, wildly improvise now.
I guess I'll give it a shot. It
Okay.
seems like if you're fully surrendered to the circumstances, I know the book says that if you're fully connected to the circumstances, your body has no choice but to allow those circumstances to kind of unfold organically and intuitively. And I think that that's how I look at if you're surrendered fully to the circumstances, your body has no choice but to green light within the authenticity of what those circumstances are. It feels like if you are surrendered, then green lighting is it's easier to align yourself in a way that allows you to green light in an almost seamless way.
Beautiful. Well, as always, Deanna, the way that you put things, I don't think anybody else would put it that way. And it's always very fresh and unique. And in the end, I always say, yes, absolutely. Right? Never thought of it, but yes, absolutely. Kimon, what are your thoughts? Maybe your students asked you that question. Maybe you at some point began to wonder, wait a second, what's the difference between surrender and green lighting? Is there a difference?
I think we're sometimes interchanging it with also allow and give into
Allow
it.
is actually closer to the original Russian term
Mhm,
that Demidov
mhm,
uses, right? Because he uses puskai or
mhm.
puskaite, right? And I had huge difficulty translating it. I spent hours and hours and hours when I was translating Demidov trying to find an equivalent. And allowing is not really it,
Yeah,
right?
it's not.
Letting yourself, allowing yourself is a little bit closer, but it doesn't sound right. You see what I
Mhm,
mean? Because there is a certain directionality in that puskaite, right? There is
mhm.
something very specific, very concrete, very tangible, right? And finally, I came up with green lighting, right? But allowing would be one more way, right? That
One
could be
more way to
translated.
say it, yeah.
Mhm.
But when we talk about surrender and the difference, if you like, about surrendering green lighting, when you put it that way, the first word that comes to me, it's the exact opposite. It's the break. So I think part of it is one allows you to give in to whatever is happening. And the other one, green lighting, is, I think, your ability to follow that first thing and train yourself to follow that first thing. And that's a hair split second that these things happen. And sometimes, and I know people will hear about the word break, what the break means now. That's a different question. But we have the tendency to stop things. And that's usually the schools that we come from, the control. The idea to control something, the idea to implement ourselves into something, be it an idea, be it an action, be it whatever comes in mind. And that idea to green light that first thing and then let go and follow whatever's happening, I think it's that little jump start that you said, Andre. But that's the way I'm thinking about it right now because we're talking about
Very
it.
nice. Very nice. Well, then let me summarize maybe what Deanna said and what you said the best I can. Um, what I'm hearing is that green lighting, right? When Demidov prompts to you, and he has this ingenious technique of prompting the actor, not telling them what to do, but only facilitating their own process, right? And believe you me, the older I get, the more difficult it is for me to teach. Sometimes I teach 3 hours per day, right? Sometimes I teach 5.5, 6 hours per day, right? Because when I go and do the master classes, for example, or when I teach both in our program online and then at the FSU Oslo, right? We are talking about almost 6 hours per day. And I realize that it takes a lot of energy from the facilitator. Both Deanna and Kimon, you will, of course, connect with that, because throughout the class, I'm watching every microscopic movement of the actor's face, right? Every blink of their eyes, every slight movement of their hands, every small tilt of their body. Why? Because very often they do apply the brakes, because they're not used to giving themselves creative freedom. And so they actually second guess themselves. And I have to make sure that they follow their creative intentions, so that if their hand began to move because they want to gently touch the partner's arm, right? That I say, green light it, give it a green light, right? Or when they are about to stand up, but for some reason holding themselves to the chair, why do we do it, right? The audience sees we are about to stand up, but for some reason we hold ourselves back to the chair, and the audience is split because we are split. And at that moment, I would say, green light that movement, and they would always stand up. Or they're about to say something, but they're second guessing themselves. And then trying to match the emotion with which they're about to say, I might say very softly or very angrily, give it a green light, right? If they are angry at that moment, right? And by doing that, I facilitate it. But it takes a lot of energy to follow every microscopic inner and outer urge or manifestation of their life and to support it. It does take a lot of energy, right? And so what happens is when I say give it a green light, I think what I'm doing is I'm slightly nudging them.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean? It's a very slight nudge to go in the direction in which they're already going. But for
Mhm.
some
Reaction,
reason,
yeah.
they're either second guessing themselves or they're about to second guess themselves, right? And surrender is actually not a nudge, if you think about it. Surrender is a release.
Mhm.
Right? If with green lighting, I'm slightly nudging myself in that direction or nudging the actor if I'm supporting them in the Demidovian support method, you can say it. And when I am overcome or beginning to be overcome with a particular physical sensation or with a particular emotion, what I might want to prompt or do is give in to it, release to it. You see what I mean?
Mhm.
Release to it, give in to it versus slight nudge, which is why Diana is absolutely right. For example, can you greenlight the circumstances? No, you can only surrender to them, you see. Can you greenlight a movement? Yes, you can. You don't surrender to a movement, right? You greenlight it. So that's interesting, right? When it comes to emotions, physical sensations, circumstances, you can only release yourself towards them, which is not an effort, which is absolute surrender. And when it comes to about to speak something, right? I'm ready to speak now. I'm ready to say that line. I'm right. Or I'm ready to get up. I'm ready to move towards the window, right? Then it is green lighting. It is a slight nudge. Again, not an effort really, because there is no willpower in Demidov. There is only following the forces that are driving you and not really driving it. So it is not an effort in the Stanislavskian kind of active way, but it is a very slight nudge in the direction in which I am already going, you see. So ingenious device, right? Absolutely paramount culture, because without it, we would be sitting on our impulses. Without it, we would not be able to give in to something minuscule and subtle, which is how most of the impulses come, let's be very clear, right? And let it catapult us into the stratosphere of heightened emotions if we know how to surrender, if we know how to ride it, right? If we know how to greenlight it.
Exactly what I was saying. Yep. Just
Yeah,
like that.
and what Kimon was saying, of course, right? So yeah, that's just my 2 cents, because I do get these questions every once in a while, right? Every once in a while, we have very inquisitive actors, right, who are actually constantly thinking about their art. And well, obviously, it's not a prerequisite to being a great actor. Sometimes it helps to lose your head and to be a dummy, as Demidov says, right? Not stupid, right? But what Demidov calls dumb luck, right? or beginner's luck, where it's not about stupidity, it's just not overthinking obstacles and difficulties and just going with your instinct, green lighting, surrendering, right, to that dumb luck in us, which of
May I
course is
ask a
intuition, which
question?
of course is instinct. Yes, Deanna.
What has been standing out to me lately is when you offer that the body is a dress for the soul. And I'm curious about how to look at that when it comes to surrender and green lighting, with this idea that it's your soul carrying you through the experience. And I would imagine that you wouldn't be able to activate that unless you were fully surrendered. So I'm curious of what your thoughts would be on that.
That's huge. That's very important. Thank you for bringing it up because it kind of combines surrender and green lighting with breaks, with what Kimon mentioned as well, right? Because it's very interesting. On one hand, Demidov calls the actorly imagination, that is imagination that is specific to us actors, right? And differs from imagination of a writer, storyteller, right? Or imagination of a visual artist. So Demidov defines our imagination as physical, which means it kind of sits in the body. On the other hand, he says the body is just a costume for the soul, just a dress for the soul. It should not have its own agenda, the body. For example, if I'm wearing this shirt and I get up and go somewhere, the shirt is not going to stay here. The shirt is just going to go with me, right? Because it's just something that's on me. So in the very same way, the body is the dress for the soul. So do you see how there is a contradiction there? If our imagination sits in the body because it's physical imagination, physiological, physical imagination, something that we will be covering actually during one of the upcoming summer intensives, right? In fact, we have two summer intensives coming up. One is dedicated to the culture of surrender. Another one is dedicated to that physical, physiological imagination that is at the core of the Demidov work. Both are in June and both are preceding our 10th annual summer course, which was taking place in London, actually, from the 22nd to the 27th. Shameless plug, I guess, right? But you do have to train this somewhere, right?
Green light it, Andre.
Yes, absolutely. Listen, Deanna, Kimon, you realize that there are people who are following this podcast, but this is theory. You do
Yeah.
want to train it, right? Which is why
Absolutely.
I'm just
Absolutely.
saying, listen, guys, it's all wonderful, but come and train the culture of
Sure.
surrender with us
Sure.
online in June, right? Come and train this physiological, physical imagination with us later in June. And of course, if you can come to London for the Culture of Freedom 10th annual summer course, that would be glorious as well. And London is a great place, as both of you know, to also see a lot of good theater and diverse theater. So going back to physical, right? And how is it all connected? Okay, Demidov distinguishes between body and muscles. Muscles are preconditioned through these thousands of years of civilization, through whatever it is that we are trained since childhood, right? Muscles are preconditioned to kick in, to tense up, and actually kill the intensity of our emotions. That's exactly what they're there for. When you are getting really angry, your fists are going to clench. Why? Because you are controlling your anger this way. Extreme muscular tension is lessening the emotion and preventing you from what? Surrendering to the emotions fully. So when we are talking about breaks, we are not talking about the body itself. We are talking about muscular aspects of the body, which is why when it comes to bodybuilding, for example, it's actually one way to lessen your emotional involvement. Because the stronger the muscles, the more effective they are in terms of turning you off emotionally, the more powerful they are. They create that shield, right? That is actually an impenetrable shield that does not let in or let out emotions. Which is why, as an actor, you really want to choose how you exercise physically. And some ways of exercising actually can make you less sensitive because they are reinforcing the power of the braking mechanism. And the braking mechanism in us is, of course, the muscles. So when it comes to the muscles, we want to put them to sleep. Demidov has this beautiful device of the great sleep of the body, right? Where the muscles are melting away. And when they melt away, then, Diana, of course, the body no longer abstracts the emotions. The body no longer breaks the emotions, right? The body no longer opposes the emotions. It goes with the emotions wherever they are taking you. Because emotions are physical. Emotions are directional. Emotions are physical. So then when a certain emotion wants to take wing, right? It actually begins to move you emotionally in a certain direction. The moment there is a directionality, the body has to follow. The body has to go in that direction. Of great actresses, for example, Eleonora Duse, right? The actress who is constantly quoted by Demidov. The great Eleonora Duse was known to not walk on stage. They said that as if some force picked her up and moved her from one part of the stage to another. So there is an absolute evidence of not having a body, just pure spirit moved, right? So what that means is that her body was completely subjected to her soul. Her body was nothing but the dress for the soul, where the gesture came from the soul, the movement came from the soul, and instead of opposing the emotions through physical tension, the body released or surrendered to the emotions, and therefore her movements were beautiful, of course, because they were filled with spirit. They were spirit driven, right? Her gesture was beautiful, but beautiful is not the right word. They were true to the character's experience also. They were true to what the character felt, what the character wanted, what the character was, because that's a real movement training or voice training, right? Is to help your voice and movement to surrender your body, to surrender to character. Because when we are developing voices that are beautiful or loud or powerful, I think we are missing the point. When we are developing bodies that are expressive and elegant or sexy or whatever it is, right? We are missing the point. Our body should be subjected to the spirit. Our body should be subjected to the character. Our voice should be subjected to the character's voice, right? They should just be completely surrendered to the character. And so that's a very different training, if you see, right? A very different movement training, very different voice training that is dedicated to that kind of goal rather than the goal of being loud, expressive, being able to reach the balcony. Yeah, of course, you can try and reach the balcony with your voice, or you can truly surrender to the character and to the circumstances. And guess what? Then the balcony will come to you and be completely immersed in what you are doing and who you are, and will then hear your every whisper. So those are my thoughts, and thank you for asking that question, because it is a very, very important question, right? How come the body is just a dress for the soul, right? If our imagination is physical. What Demidov meant when he said actorly imagination is physical is that it's not cerebral. It has nothing to do with visual images. It doesn't come from the head, you see. It allows you to stay here and now, which means we imagine in physical sensations that don't take us out of being here and now, because they don't override as visual imagination can, right? They do not override completely the reality that we are in. We still stay with the partner. We stay on that set, right? We do not hallucinate and see something else instead of what we are seeing. But for us, everything that we are seeing, of course, transforms into what it is for the character. But it doesn't happen through visual hallucination, right? It doesn't take us out of being here and now. It's a completely different mechanism which has something to do with the body imagining all these things. Released body, of course, right? Imagining these things through emotions, thoughts, sensations, physical sensations, right? Movements, of course, not visual images.
Andre, a quick question, and I think it's of a more general nature. But if I remember correctly, Demidov says that genuine surrender requires 10 times more courage than any activity, in a sense. So my question would be, why do we try so hard to control something that actually works better when we don't control it? Do you think
Absolutely,
it's
yeah.
because of the training? Do you think it's because of the philosophy that most acting techniques follow,
True.
saying that acting is action?
True, but there is a deeper meaning to that. Demidov gives us a wonderful analogy. He says, and that has everything to do with the willpower and surrender, right? By the way, Demidov has this paradoxical saying. He says, the only reason we need willpower in acting is so that to cancel it. So apparently sometimes it takes a lot of willpower to cancel willpower. Why do you cancel it? So you could surrender. Surrender to your actual moods, to your actual emotions, to your actual thoughts, right? All of it comes from character, of course. But sometimes actors don't trust that it comes from character. They second guess themselves, right? But why does it happen? For a very simple reason. So Demidov has this analogy. Imagine that you are out in the country somewhere on a fine summer day. The weather is beautiful. It is a Sunday, and you're walking along the railroad tracks. And you could lie down smack between the two rails and just rest there for a while. Because it's Sunday and trains don't come through this area on a Sunday. And so there's absolutely no danger. So you could lie down between the railroad tracks and just rest there for a while. And it takes absolutely no willpower to continue lying. And now imagine that the train is approaching. You could continue lying down between the two rails because the train is not going to harm you. It's just going to go above you. It's not going to touch you. But now with the train approaching, how much willpower do you need to apply to just continue lying there between the tracks and doing nothing? And then he adds, the train is the audience. So that's the answer to your question, Timon. The reason we constantly design, predetermine, the reason we apply all of this effort to make sure that we are driving it, all of these actions, all of this constant manipulation of the audience is that we are afraid of the audience. We are afraid that they will not receive us. We are afraid that they will find us boring, not convincing, right? That's what Demidov says to the actors who are just coming in. Remember his little speech where during the first class he congratulates you on being accepted because you beat, another 8,000 people, because if it's in the Soviet Union and Russia, right, huge country, you beat 10,000 people, 20,000 people, I don't know how many people are trying for the same place. And then he says, but I have absolutely nothing to teach you. Because for all of your life, almost 24/7, you were getting up from the chair, going to the window, opening the window. You were confessing your love to someone, getting into arguments. In other words, you were doing this and training this 24/7. He says 24/7 because we continue doing it in our dreams. Therefore, I have absolutely nothing to teach you, because you already know how to do all that. It is true, he adds, that when having to do all that in front of the audience, we do get self-conscious. And this is where I can help you. Is he oversimplifying things, perhaps, right? But the reason actors do not dare to surrender to their actual impulses, creative impulses, and constantly kill them by presetting, predetermining, constructing behavior, right? And then through tremendous physical, mental, emotional effort, fulfilling all that, every performance, right, is that they are afraid of the audience. They don't trust that the audience will receive whatever it is that they're spontaneously creating. Or they don't trust themselves that they can create spontaneously because they don't have the Demidovian technique of spontaneity, because they do not have the Demidovian technique of freedom, because they do not have the Demidovian technique of surrender, right? Because they actually don't know how to greenlight their instinct. Why is it, Deanna, Kimon, that we constantly with finest actors, right, have to help them and say, green light that movement, because they're about to do it. But if we don't say green light that movement, they will never do it. Or give in to that emotion, surrender. Why is it that we constantly prompt, and in the early exercises, in the early etudes, right, Kim and Deanna, we prompt almost every second.
Yeah.
Later, we
Mhm.
back off and begin to prompt only in pivotal moments. But even in pivotal moments, it is important to support the actor when they're already quite established in this work. Because imagine somebody said to you something very hurtful as part of the etude, as part of the scene. And for a while, it's a shock. And if I green light chaos that is actually occurring to almost everybody after they have been hit with something really powerful, I'm just going to go into a movement storm. I'm just going to go into a stupid chaos and want to do 7 things simultaneously, right? Like people lose control, so to speak, lose their wits during fire. And instead of grabbing something really dear to them, right, they walk out of the burning building with a tea kettle, right, or with a dirty rag, because they're panicking. So that panic is what is about to happen to the actor, and we don't want them to surrender to panic, because there's one thing that Demidov absolutely insists that we should outweight if it comes to us, and that is chaos and panic, or crude, violent instincts that we still carry, apparently. I guess from long time ago, right? So in this case, Demidov, in that pivotal moment, will say to the actor, take your time. And sometimes will say it very powerfully, coming in like as a ton of brick. Take your time. Before you know it, the actor outweighs the panic. Some genuine impulse comes in, and they follow that impulse, and a catastrophe has been avoided. So surrender, green light, of course, but I think it would be very important to say that as facilitators, right, we always make sure that actors do not surrender to panic, do not surrender to chaos, and do not surrender to anything crude and violent, ultimately, right? That they always outweigh these impulses if they come.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Actually, I'm going to surrender to my inner Nolan, and I'm going to greenlight this round by saying I think this is the best place for us to leave it today. And thank you so much, as always, for being so generous with your time. Diana, Andre, thank you so much. And for those who are interested in our conversation today, in the links below will always be a way to reach out, a way to find the masterclasses, and a way to find our longer courses as well. And Andre, do you have the dates for the online courses and the summer course?
Well, I know that we are offering the 10th annual Demidov summer course in London, and that is in the central London, right next to Sherlock Holmes' Baker Street apartment at the Rudolf Steiner house, between the 22nd and 27th, 22nd to the 27th of June. But it will be preceded by 2 online annual, also Demidov Summer Intensive. Demidov Summer Intensive Part 1, dedicated to the actor's surrender, is June 1st through 5th. 2026, obviously, followed by, as I mentioned, Demidov Summer Intensive Part 2, and that is June 8th through 12th. And that one is dedicated to Demidov culture of physiological truth. And we will talk about in future podcasts, of course, about physiological truth and what it means. But that's it. So please join us.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you both. And
Thank
we'll see
you.
you on the next podcast. Thank you.
Wonderful. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.